I was 16 when I first met Sophia. We were high school sweethearts, the kind of love you only read about in books or see in movies. She was my first in everything. My first crush, my first date, my first kiss, and eventually my first time. We were inseparable, or at least it felt that way. I still remember the day I mustered up the courage to ask her out. My palms were sweaty, and I couldn't stop stuttering, but when she smiled and said yes, it felt like the world opened up. From that moment on, we were together. Every day. Every chance we got. I was her everything, and she was mine. We'd spend hours talking about our dreams, our future. She wanted to be a doctor. I didn't know what I wanted to be at that point, but I knew I wanted her to be by my side while I figured it out. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they were decent people, or so I thought at the time. They weren't flashy or greedy, just hard-working folks who made sure their kids had what they needed. I thought they liked me too. Especially John, her brother, who was only a year older than me. We hung out a lot, playing video games, sometimes playing soccer in the park. It felt like he was becoming my own brother. Then there was Sophia's mom, Elena. She was always polite, always smiling, but I could tell she was protective of her daughter. At first, I didn't think much of it. After all, any mother would want the best for her child, right? But as the years went by, that smile started feeling off, like there was something she wasn't saying. Still, everything seemed perfect, or at least, I wanted to believe it was. By the time Sophia and I had been together for about 5 years, things were starting to change. Not just small changes, either big changes. When we were younger, everything seemed effortless. We could talk for hours, laugh at stupid jokes, and just be ourselves. But somewhere along the line, things started to feel different. It was subtle at first. Shorter texts, less laughter, and less enthusiasm in her voice when we made plans. I'd call, and she'd say she was busy. I'd try to hold her hand, and she'd pull it away without a second thought. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but I knew something was wrong. I started telling myself it was just a phase, that relationships go through ups and downs, that we'd find our way back to each other. But the distance between us kept growing, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge the gap. I wanted to ask her what was going on, but every time I tried, she'd just change the subject or brush me off with a tired, "I'm fine, it's nothing." I remember sitting on the park bench one afternoon, waiting for her. It was one of the rare days we had decided to meet up. She was late, again, but that wasn't unusual by this point. When she finally arrived, she barely acknowledged me. No kiss, no hug. Just a brief, awkward smile. I reached for her hand, trying to find a sliver of that connection we once had, but she pulled it away, pretending to fiddle with her phone. That was the moment I knew. Something had shifted, and it wasn't just us growing up. It was something deeper. A week later, she broke up with me. We met up after her shift at the cafe where she worked part-time. I could tell by the look on her face that something was wrong, but I tried to ignore it. She was distant, her eyes flicking between me and the table, like she couldn't bear to look me in the eye. "We need to talk," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the chatter in the cafe. Those words, they hit me like a punch to the gut. "I don't think this is working anymore," she continued. I don't feel the same way." I remember staring at her, trying to process what she was saying. We had been together for 5 years, 5 years. We had been through so much together. How could she just throw it all away? I tried to argue, to tell her we could fix things, that we could work through whatever it was. But she shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "It's not you," she whispered. I don't have the same feelings anymore. I'm sorry." And that was it. Just like that, it was over. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Sure, people fell out of love all the time, but this didn't feel like a natural drift. There was something else, something more. And then, I found out the truth. It wasn't long after the breakup that one of our mutual friends, Max, pulled me aside one night. He was never one to get involved in other people's business, so I knew something serious was on his mind. "Look, man," he said, shifting awkwardly. There's something you need to know about Sophia. My heart raced. I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear whatever he was about to say. It wasn't her idea to break up, Max continued, glancing around nervously as if someone might overhear us. Her mom, Elena, she's been in her ear for months. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? Her mom told her you weren't good enough, Max explained, his voice low. Said you didn't have any money, no future, that you wouldn't be able to give her the life she deserved. My mind went blank. Elena? Sophia's mom had been behind the breakup? She had been filling Sophia's head with doubts about me, poisoning our relationship from the inside out? She said you didn't come from money, Max continued. Said you wouldn't amount to anything, and Sophia needed to find someone who could give her more. It all made sense now. The sudden coldness, the distance, the way Sophia had pulled away from me without warning. It wasn't just her feelings that had changed. Her mother had been planting the seeds of doubt, slowly convincing her that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't worth the effort. Anger surged through me, but beneath the anger, there was hurt, deep, aching hurt. For 5 years, I had loved Sophia, done everything I could to be a good partner, and all it had taken was a few words from her mother to tear us apart. I tried to move on. Really, I did. But it wasn't easy. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal, the sting of knowing that Sophia had let her mother's words dictate the end of our relationship. I threw myself into my work, focusing on building my future, proving to myself, and maybe to others, that I was more than what Elena had labeled me. I wasn't just some kid without money, without prospects. I had ambition, and I was determined to succeed. My mom was my rock through it all. She had always been a hard worker, raising me on her own after my dad left, and she had taught me the value of independence. She hadn't interfered in my relationship with Sophia, but she had always warned me about people who judged others based on wealth or status. "You'll make something of yourself, don't you worry," she'd say, giving me that reassuring smile only a mother can give. And one day they'll see what they missed. And so, I kept going. I finished school, landed a job, and started to work my way up. It wasn't easy, but I was determined to make a name for myself, to prove to myself that I was worth more than what Elena had painted me as. But no matter how much success I found, there was always that lingering ache, that bitter taste of betrayal that wouldn't go away. Years passed, and I moved on, or at least I tried to. I built a life for myself, surrounded by friends and family, and eventually, I found love again. But no matter how happy I was, the memory of Sophia and her mother's betrayal still haunted me. Then one day, I saw her again. It was completely by accident. I was at a networking event for work, mingling with colleagues and clients, when I spotted her across the room. Sophia. She looked different, older, more polished, but there was no mistaking her. She was talking to a man in a crisp suit, her hand resting on his arm. They looked like a couple, and from the way they were dressed, it was clear they were doing well for themselves. A pang of jealousy shot through me, but I quickly shoved it down. I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to let her hold that power over me. But then I saw Elena. She was standing off to the side, watching Sophia with that same smile she had always worn. The smile that had once seemed kind, but now felt sinister. Calculating. I wasn't sure what possessed me to approach them, but before I knew it, I was walking across the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Sophia spotted me first. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment she looked almost nervous. But then she composed herself, flashing me a tight smile. "Hey," she said, her voice a little too casual. "It's been a long time." Elena turned, her eyes narrowing slightly as she saw me approaching. The smile never left her face, but there was something cold in her gaze. "Well, look who it is," Elena said smoothly, her tone dripping with faux kindness. "How have you been?" I forced a smile, trying to keep my emotions in check. "Good. Really good, actually." There was an awkward silence between us, and I could feel the tension hanging in the air. Sophia shifted uncomfortably, glancing between me and her mother. "This is my fiancé," she said suddenly, gesturing to the man next to her. He extended his hand, and I shook it, offering a polite nod. "Congratulations," I said, my voice even. "I'm happy for you." But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty, of regret, that made me wonder if she truly was happy. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but as I left the event, I couldn't shake the feeling that fate had brought us back together for a reason. As much as I wanted to move on, as much as I wanted to forget, there was a part of me that couldn't let go of the betrayal. Not just by Sophia, but by Elena. She had torn us apart, convinced her daughter that I wasn't good enough. And maybe, deep down, I wanted to prove her wrong. I didn't go out of my way to seek revenge. That wasn't my style. But I made sure to live my life in a way that would remind them of what they had lost. Over the next few years, my career flourished. I climbed the ranks at work, started my own business, and gained a reputation as a rising star in the industry. I didn't need their validation. I had found success on my own. But every time I saw them, at events, in the news, or even in passing, I couldn't help but smile to myself. They had thought I was nothing. But I had become something. One evening, years after our last encounter, I received a message from Sophia. It was out of the blue, and I wasn't sure what to make of it. She wanted to meet up, just to talk, she said. Curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed. We met at a small cafe, far from the upscale events and glamorous dinners we had both become accustomed to. She looked different, more tired, more worn down by life. As we sat down, there was an awkward tension between us, the weight of all the years we had shared, and the pain of our separation. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "For everything." I looked at her, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" "For the way things ended. For letting my mom influence me." There it was, the confession I had always suspected but never truly heard from her lips. I stared at her, trying to gauge if this was some ploy, or if she truly meant it. "I was young," she continued, "and I was stupid. I let her get in my head, and I let her convince me that you weren't good enough. But I've always regretted it. I've always wondered what would have happened if I had fought for us." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of lost time. But as I looked at her, I realized something. It didn't matter anymore. "I'm happy now," I said softly, a small smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "I've built a good life for myself. And honestly, I'm glad things happened the way they did." Sophia looked down at her coffee, her expression unreadable. We parted ways that night, and as I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. I had spent so many years chasing success, trying to prove to myself, and to them, that I was worth something. But in the end, the best revenge wasn't wealth or status. It was peace. After that final meeting with Sophia, something shifted in me. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the past, free from the expectations others had placed on me, and, most importantly, free from the need to prove anything to anyone. I had succeeded in life, not out of spite or revenge, but because I had worked hard, grown, and carved out my own path. But despite my professional success, there was still something missing. I was happy, yes, but there was an emptiness I hadn't yet filled, a part of me that still longed for genuine connection. And then, she came into my life. Her name was Lena, and she was unlike anyone I had ever met. We didn't meet through mutual friends or at a fancy event. It was far more unexpected than that. It was a rainy Thursday evening when I first saw Lena. I had been working late, poring over contracts and financial reports, when I realized I needed a break. The rain outside had started as a drizzle but had since turned into a downpour. Rather than drive through the rain, I decided to stop by a local cafe near the office to grab something warm and wait for the storm to pass. As soon as I stepped into the cafe, the warmth hit me, a sharp contrast to the cold, damp evening outside. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods filled the air, and I immediately felt a sense of comfort. I ordered a coffee and found a seat by the window, watching the raindrops race down the glass. That's when I noticed her. Lena was sitting alone at a small table near the counter, flipping through a well-worn book. Her long brown hair was slightly damp from the rain, and she wore an oversized sweater that looked impossibly cozy. There was something captivating about her, something that drew my attention in a way I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just her appearance, though she was undoubtedly beautiful. It was the way she seemed completely absorbed in her book, the way her eyes lit up as she read, and the slight smile that tugged at her lips when she reached a particularly engaging part. I don't know what came over me, but I felt compelled to approach her. I told myself it was just to ask about the book she was reading, but deep down I knew there was more to it. "Is the book any good?" I asked, as I stood by her table. She looked up, startled by the sudden interruption, but then smiled. "Oh, it's fantastic. I've read it 3 times already." I glanced at the cover. It was a novel I had never heard of, some kind of philosophical drama about life and choices. Definitely not the usual kind of book I'd expect someone to be reading in a cafe, but I was intrigued. "I could use a recommendation," I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Mind if I join you?" To my surprise, she nodded. "Sure, but I have to warn you, once you start this book, it'll consume your life." I laughed, taking a seat. "That sounds like exactly what I need." We spent the next hour talking, not just about the book, but about everything. She was open, funny, and thoughtful in a way that immediately put me at ease. She wasn't interested in small talk or the usual questions people ask when they first meet. Instead, she wanted to know about my passions, my dreams, what made me get out of bed every morning. As we talked, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, a spark. But this time, it wasn't a fleeting infatuation or the excitement of something new. It was deeper than that. Lena didn't care about what I had achieved, or how much money I made. She wasn't impressed by status or wealth. She was curious about me, the person behind the success, and that's when I knew. This was different. Over the next few weeks, Lena and I grew closer. We started meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for dinner. It wasn't long before we began spending entire weekends together, exploring the city, visiting art galleries, or just walking through parks talking about anything and everything. Unlike my relationship with Sophia, which had felt like a constant push and pull of expectations and insecurities, being with Lena was effortless. There were no games, no mind-reading required. Everything was out in the open, and we communicated without hesitation. She was different from anyone I had ever been with. She had an independent spirit, an infectious love for life, and a fierce intelligence that made every conversation feel like an adventure. She didn't try to change me, and she didn't put me on a pedestal. Instead, she accepted me exactly as I was, flaws and all. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. One evening, as we sat on the rooftop of her apartment building, watching the sunset, Lena turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about your past relationships?" she asked softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light of the sun. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Sometimes. There's always a part of me that wonders how things might have been different." She smiled, but there was no judgment in her expression, just curiosity. "Do you think those experiences made you who you are today?" I thought about Sophia, about everything that had happened between us and how it had shaped me. I thought about the heartbreak, the betrayal, and the years I had spent trying to prove myself. And then I thought about Lena, about the peace I had found in her presence, about how being with her made me realize that I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. "Yeah," I said quietly, "they did. But I'm glad they're in the past now." She nodded, resting her head on my shoulder as the sky turned a deep shade of purple. And in that moment I knew that I had finally found something real. As time passed, my relationship with Lena deepened. It wasn't just love, it was partnership, mutual respect, and understanding. We supported each other in ways I had never experienced before. While my career continued to flourish, Lena was pursuing her own dreams. She was an artist, creating beautiful pieces of work that spoke to the soul. She was passionate about her craft, and seeing her pour herself into her art inspired me in ways I hadn't anticipated. We became each other's biggest cheerleaders, pushing one another to be better, to reach for our goals, and to keep moving forward, no matter what challenges we faced. Unlike my previous relationship, where I had always felt the need to prove myself or meet someone else's expectations, Lena made me feel like I was enough, just as I was. We moved in together after a year of dating, and it felt like the most natural decision in the world. Our apartment became a reflection of our shared lives, a mix of her art, my books, and the little pieces of ourselves that we had collected along the way. And as the years passed, I realized that everything I had been through, all the pain, the heartbreak, the struggle, had led me to this moment, to Lena, to the life we were building together. But as much as I tried to move forward, there was still a part of me that hadn't fully let go of the past. One day, out of the blue, I received a message from Sophia. We hadn't spoken since that brief encounter at the networking event years ago, and I hadn't expected to hear from her again. But there it was, a message asking if we could meet. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave the past where it belonged. But another part of me, the part that still carried the weight of our history, wanted closure. So, I agreed to meet her. We met at the same cafe where I had first met Lena. It was a strange sense of déjà vu, sitting across from Sophia after all these years. She looked different, older, more tired, but there was a familiar sadness in her eyes. "Thank you for meeting me," she said quietly, her voice tinged with regret. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately." I didn't say anything, waiting for her to continue. "I wanted to apologize," she said, her eyes dropping to the table, "for how things ended, for letting my mom interfere. I should have fought for us, but I didn't. And I've regretted it ever since." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of the past. I took a deep breath, feeling the years of pain and confusion bubble to the surface. "You made your choice," I said softly. "And I've made mine." Sophia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I know. And I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to say it. I needed you to know that I'm sorry." I looked at her, the girl I had once loved so deeply, and for the first time in years, I felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness, no longing. Just peace. "I've moved on," I said, my voice steady. "I'm happy now. I've found someone who loves me for who I am. And I hope you can find that too." Sophia smiled through her tears, nodding. "I'm glad," she whispered. "I'm really glad." We said our goodbyes, and as I walked away from that cafe, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The chapter with Sophia was finally closed. When I returned home that evening, Lena was waiting for me. She greeted me with a smile, wrapping her arms around me as I walked through the door. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice soft and understanding. I kissed her forehead, feeling a warmth in my chest. It went exactly how it needed to. We spent the rest of the night together, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying each other's company. And as I lay beside her, I realized that I had found everything I had ever been searching for. Sophia had been my first love, but Lena was my forever.